The Odrysian Kingdom is a pretty weird faction. They have good generals options in the Thracian Royal Cavalry. That has a good charge, expert charge defense, and is decent in a cavalry fight because of its bonus against large, and its good melee attack. Then we have the Thracian Nobles. These guys, looking at their stats, they are absolute killers. 76 melee attack, 45 weapon damage, 63 charge bonus, so these guys have a bigger charge bonus than most of the cavalry units in the game, barring elite shock cavalry. But where they fall through is on their melee defense. They don't really have melee defense, because their shield doesn't give them a melee defense value. Their shield gives them a 20 armor value, but they have a 0% chance to block incoming missiles. That means these guys are going to be able to get a lot of kills on the charge, but in extended melees, they're going to have problems against a lot of the units in the game. Then we have the Falxmen, the mercenary Thracian, or the Thracian warriors, and the Thracian nobles here, same as the generals options. And these guys are identical to the Thracian nobles in that they have very good attacking and charging stats, but they die very quickly in prolonged melee, so ideally you want to get these guys in from the rear or from the flank if you can. But still, their Falx and their rhompaia have a good... These guys have Falxes, these guys have rhompaia. They are slightly different weapons, but they both have a good bonus against large attached to them. But they won't be able to stand up to charges very well, but if you can tie them down with, for example, these mercenary Dacian spears or the hoplites, then you can really do some damage with them. And the mercenary Dacian spears, or the Kardashian spears, because they look like Kim Kardashian, are cheap spear units that are useful for soaking up enemy missile fire. And your hoplites, your standard hoplites. Then we have standard Thracian bows, Thracian slingers, standard crappy skirmishing units. Thracian skirmishers, very high missile damage for their price, will be able to make elephants run amok in a single shot, and very useful for engaging just about everything at range. The Thracian peltasts are decent in melee with a melee attack of 28 and weapon damage of 35. Also have the very high missile damage, so they can do a lot of damage to, especially when firing into the unshielded side or the rear of enemy units and against cavalry. For melee cavalry, you only have low mid-tier Thracian horse, but these are very good for their price. Very useful units for both hunting down enemy skirmishers and engaging enemy cavalry. And you have the Thracian Royal Cavalry. That is useful in multiple roles: rear charging, charging sword infantry, and cavalry fights. One of the really nice units that the Thracians have is the Thracian Cavalry. And they have decent missile damage, but where they really shine is their 40 melee attack, 36 weapon damage, 16 charge bonus, and 36 melee defense with 40 armor. So this makes them very useful in throwing all of their javelins and then charging into melee, preferably the rear of enemy units. Now, for the general's options, if you want to keep your general alive, go for the Thracian Royal Cavalry. If you want to YOLO charge, go for the Thracian Nobles. And Thracian Nobles are going to wreck just about every infantry unit if you get a good charge on them in the game. But it can be risky bringing them because they are so susceptible to cavalry charges and missiles. So if you're going to use these guys, it's a good idea to screen them with some cheaper troops so that they can't be robbed of their charge bonus by enemy cavalry, and so that they can't be tied down by cheap units. You also want some cavalry to stop enemy cavalry, and you also want some skirmishing cavalry to take care of enemy cavalry, to harass skirmishers a bit. But as you can see, if you're going for a lot of cavalry, which you kind of need as the Odrysian Kingdom, it's going to be difficult to have the funds to bring melee units with staying power, and you don't really have that option anyway. So you might go lighter on the Thracian cavalry, you might bring more Thracian warriors, or you might just surprise your opponent entirely with the Odrysian Kingdom, and this is something that I like to do in quick battles, because most people just think your standard Odrysian build is what you're going to come up against. So this can be risky, but if you go fairly cav heavy, and you go for some cheap mercenary Dacian spears, you go for some Thracian warriors, you still have the killing power from your Thracian warriors, but you can also afford some additional supporting units if you remove some of the warriors, and now you have the funds to go for some nobles in addition to this. So if you want to take out the nobles and go for cheap Thracian warriors instead, you can absolutely do it, or you can go for be a bit cheeky and go for some Thracian peltasts. So you have a pretty substantial skirmishing capability, at least at close range. But you're still going to lack infantry killing power with this type of build, so it might be a good idea to bring a noble or two and get them in when the enemy skirmishers have been dealt with. So this type of build can be a bit risky to bring, but if your opponent brings a standard Odrysian counter build, then you can do quite well with this type of setup, and you can play around with what units you can bring if you take out certain units. And if you only bring 4 Thracian peltas, you can go with 3 nobles, for example. But then you need to really use your cavalry to good effect. You can go for more of these guys, and the Odrysian Kingdom only has really 2 options. It's going full on with the Thracian warriors and the Thracian peltas and the Thracian nobles. And if you're able to make this work and you're able to get into melee with your opponent, and he isn't able to rear charge you and use his missiles against you, this can be a very dangerous build. But it's just that it's so easy to kite away from the Odrysian Kingdom and inflict massive casualties on them, because their most important troops have a 0 chance of blocking incoming enemy missiles. So while the Odrysian Kingdom is scary as hell in close combat, the problem is actually getting there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on the battlefield.